Welcome to Voices of Resistance, the podcast that uncovers the raw truths of power, corruption, and courage across Africa. I'm your host, Human Being, and today we're diving into a scandal that's bleeding Zimbabwe dry: the gold mafia. Billions in gold, stolen, political elites exposed, and one man, a former insider, calling for a national uprising. This is a story of betrayal, resistance, and a nation at the crossroads. Joining me is Zimbabwean citizen, a Zimbabwean journalist and activist who's been tracking this crisis. Zimbabwean, welcome to the show. You know what's absolutely mind-blowing? Zimbabwe loses $1.5 billion in gold every single year. That's enough money to transform their entire healthcare system, but instead it's vanishing through an intricate web of corruption and smuggling.
Well, that really puts it in perspective. We're not just talking about missing gold bars, but actual human lives being affected by this massive theft.
And here's what makes this story so fascinating. It's not just happening in dark alleys or remote mines. This corruption goes straight to the top, with government officials caught on camera offering to help launder money through diplomatic channels.
You're talking about that Al Jazeera documentary that exposed Hubert Angel, right? That was a real watershed moment.
Exactly right. Here's a presidential envoy, someone with diplomatic immunity, literally bragging about how he could move millions in gold because no one checks his bags. It's like something out of a movie, except it's destroying a nation's economy.
So what's really interesting to me is how this whole operation works from the ground up. Could you break down that chain of corruption?
Well, it starts with artisanal miners. We're talking about ordinary Zimbabweans working in incredibly dangerous conditions. These small-scale operations actually produce more than 60% of the country's gold.
That's such a crucial detail. These aren't big mining corporations, but regular people trying to make a living.
Right, and here's where it gets really insidious. These miners are forced to sell their gold to politically connected middlemen who pay them way below market rates. Then these middlemen have this whole network of smuggling routes: private planes, fake documents, even diplomatic pouches.
And I imagine once that gold leaves Zimbabwe, it becomes nearly impossible to trace.
Exactly. It gets laundered through shell companies in places like Mauritius or the British Virgin Islands. Then, get this, some of that money actually comes back into Zimbabwe as supposedly legitimate investment, buying up mansions or funding political campaigns.
Well, that explains why the government seems so reluctant to crack down on this activity. They're benefiting from it directly.
And speaking of the government, let's talk about Fidelity printers and refiners. They're supposed to be the state's official gold buyer and regulator. But according to multiple sources, they're either actively participating in the corruption or deliberately looking the other way.
You know what's really striking about this? The contrast between these politically connected dealers walking in with bags of cash, no questions asked, while ordinary Zimbabweans can barely afford basic necessities.
That's right. And this brings us to one of the most dramatic developments in this story. Blessed Geza, a former insider who's now become a whistleblower. This man was actually part of the ruling elite, a Liberation War veteran and former ZANUPF Central Committee member.
That must have taken incredible courage, going from system insider to public enemy number one.
Well, he didn't just speak out, he called for a national shutdown on March 31st, 2025. And here's what happened. Harare, the capital city, basically turned into a ghost town. Shops closed, schools empty, streets deserted.
Though from what I understand, there weren't many actual protests in the streets, right?
That's correct, and it speaks volumes about the level of fear in Zimbabwe. The government had riot police everywhere. They were arresting suspected organizers, and they labeled any form of dissent as treason.
Well, that really shows how threatened they felt by even peaceful resistance.
And here's what makes this whole situation so tragic. That $1.5 billion in stolen gold isn't just a number on a spreadsheet. It represents unpaid teachers, hospitals without medicine, and savings destroyed by inflation.
So what can actually be done about this? It seems like such an overwhelming problem.
Well, there are several concrete steps that people are pushing for. First, there's the demand for an independent gold oversight body with international auditors. No more secret deals, no more unaccounted transactions.
That makes sense. Sunshine is the best disinfectant, as they say.
Then there's the crucial work of protecting whistleblowers like Hopewell Chinono, who's been doing incredible investigative journalism. He's actually quoted saying, "They are not fighting corruption. They are protecting it. The gold flows, but it builds no hospitals, pays no teachers, it enriches a cartel.
You know what's fascinating about this? The parallels with other resource rich countries that have faced similar challenges.
Absolutely. Look at what happened in Sudan in 2019. People power actually managed to topple a dictator. Even in Zimbabwe itself, the 2016 stayaways showed that organized resistance can force the government to listen.
Though I imagine the risks of speaking out are pretty severe.
They are, and that's something we need to acknowledge. We're talking about arrests, beatings, and worse. But here's what Geza said in a recent post. Cowards will keep Zimbabwe poor. One day of fear cannot compare to a lifetime of suffering.
That's such a powerful statement about the cost of silence versus the price of action.
And it really gets to the heart of what this story is about. It's not just about gold smuggling or corruption. It's about how systems of exploitation can only survive when people accept them as normal.
Well, that brings up an interesting question. How do you balance the need for change with the very real risks that come with resistance?
That's something activists are grappling with right now. The key seems to be strategic, organized resistance rather than reckless confrontation, building community networks, sharing information, and creating systems of mutual support.
And I suppose that's where international attention and support becomes crucial too.
Exactly. The gold mafia thrives in darkness. The more people who know about what's happening, the harder it becomes to continue the looting. Every voice raised, every story shared, every act of resistance, it all adds up.
That's really what it comes down to, isn't it? Like the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change.
And that's perhaps the most important takeaway from this whole story. Change isn't just possible, it's inevitable when enough people decide they've had enough. The question isn't if Zimbabwe will transform, but when and how. This isn't just a story about gold. It's about power, betrayal, and the fight for Zimbabwe's soul. Blessed Geza's call, the gold mafia's crimes, they're a wake-up call. The question is, will we answer? Thank you, Zimbabwean citizen, for your insight and courage. And to our listeners, stay informed, stay safe, and never stop asking questions. This is Voices of Resistance. Until next time, keep the fire burning.